Welcome to today's podcast. Our guest for everyone today is in the real estate industry, the entertainment industry, and is a MC. Lives on the beautiful Gold Coast in Australia. Welcome to the show, Rob Dory.
Hey Rob, it's a good name, mate.
It's
Nice.
a great,
Has
mate.
character.
Very, very much, very, very much. You might live on the Gold Coast these days, but you didn't always live in sun and surf. Where did you come from before then?
Yeah, so my very early years, I was born in Blacktown Hospital.
Mm.
Lived in Lethbridge Park, Mount Druitt Housing Commission, and but moved out of there at a very young age. So moved out of there probably around about 4.
Yep.
And it moved up to another very beautiful part of the world on the Central Coast, Gosford area. So Boca Terrigal was in Terrigal Surf Club, Kilcare Surf Club, and grew up real bush-like setting. I could ride my push bike to the beach.
Awesome.
It was a bit of a ride. I don't think my kids would do it now. It was it was probably a good 50-minute ride up probably one of the steepest hills you have ever found. But that's what we did back then, right?
Yes, true.
That's what we did. So yeah, I was there until I left home at 18. Went back a couple of times, but lived in Newcastle after that. Lived in Cairns, Brisbane, and then eventually back in Sydney town and all around the city in multiple places: Balmain, Potts Point, Paddington, Alexandria, Surrey Hills. Should I go on?
You certainly moved around.
And then eventually moved out to the Macarthur.
Yeah.
And with my now wife.
Yes.
And for a job out there, which is how we obviously met one another.
Yep.
And was in that area for, I guess, 14 years, roughly, 13, 14 years. And lived in multiple areas around there. So, yeah. And then moved up here 3.5 years ago, and we'll have never looked back. It's amazing.
You are in a beautiful part of the country. If we go back, was Rob Dory a good student?
When you look at the career I ended up in, 30 years in radio, it's probably not surprising when I say that I talked too much in class. I think what I got home was, if he just applied himself and talked less, maybe he'd do it much better. In my early years in primary school, I was in lots of mixed classes. So I felt I actually missed out on quite a bit of education. I was the oldest in I guess a class of 3 ages, 3 years. So I had some periods in my schooling where I don't really believe I learned a lot.
Yep.
So by the time I got to high school, I was in very low classes. So we had 10 levels and I was at 8. By year 10, I was in straight 2s, I think it was. So good teachers, and I realised that I wasn't a dummy, that I had half a clue and had good teachers that got me through. So yeah, but yeah, look, I used to sit outside of class on a desk, outside the class.
Wow.
Because I used to talk a lot.
Do you think that maybe was because that school might have just, what they were teaching and the style they were teaching bored you?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I used to sit up at the back of class with my mate, Craig Lane. And he used to, so I loved music. And he used to name a word and I'd have to think of a song, and we would play that when we went to mathematics class. So I'd get kicked out.
Yeah.
The funny thing was, I think they thought it was a bad thing. You're getting into trouble. Dory, we're going to make you sit out in the veranda. But the funny thing was, I actually really liked it. It was a great view. Girls played netball. And the work that I was meant to do, I could get done, right? No one's annoying me either. So, yeah, there you go. Make the most out of a situation, right?
Yeah, well, that's so true. We always would. So you finished school. What did your dad say to you? Go and get an apprentice son, or go and work in the bank, or?
My parents were pretty good in the sense that they never pushed me in any direction. Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I think maybe it would have been good if I got pushed a little bit more.
Yeah. They
would just back whatever I wanted to do. So when I initially left school, I got a job as a geotechnician, which is in civil engineering. So testing soils for building of roads and landfill and what have you. I only did that for a few months, and then I got offered another job to become a design draftsman in mechanical engineering. So I trained at a company called Australian Consulting Engineers Association on Broadway in Sydney. We would go there 4 days a week, and then another day and nights I'd go to TAFE as well. And that was drawing, which was one of my loves. I loved drawing, and I would have loved to have been an architect, which is a very George Costanza thing to say. And we probably have similar heights.
Yes. He's just got a few more zeros in the bank balance.
Oh, you reckon? You reckon? Just a few?
Just a few.
So yeah, so when I first left school, that was the career that I took. I didn't last at the drafting. I ended up leaving that and went back to the geotech work, which I actually really enjoyed, and I contemplated doing geology at university. I also signed up in Canberra to do landscape architecture, and then radio came calling and took me in a totally different trajectory that I had never thought about in my life.
So how did you get into radio? I mean, you've got a great voice. Anyone that's met you or listened to you, if someone said you got a natural ability, your voice is very much suited for radio and for the entertainment industry.
Yeah,
but you need more than that to get in. I mean, how what were you running the coffee for the DJ or doing the copy in the newsroom? How did you get in?
So I did radio school.
Yeah.
That came about, it was a chance meeting with a friend of mine, Andrew Moreau, who incidentally used to play Humphrey. Any kids watching, he knew Humphrey, best friends with Humphrey. So Humphrey was like not a franchise, but there were a couple of them across the country. And Andrew used to be Humphrey and go out to, fairs and what have you. Anyway, we ran into one another in the street in Gosford, and I was in my lunch break, and it was just a chance meeting. And, we didn't even hang out together at school. We knew one another. And we agreed to catch up, but he was pretty busy. Said probably the best time, Friday night, I do DJ down at Terrigal Country Club.
Yep.
Why don't you pop down? I'll get you a beer on the house.
Yeah.
I think I was probably earning $20 a week, so a free beer is always good.
Yep.
And he goes, we'll catch up. So I went down, and we got to the end of the night, and I went, so let me get this straight, Andrew. You come down here on a Friday night, you play all your favourite music, you get to meet girls, you get free drinks, and then they pay you at the end? I'm in. How do I do this? Yeah. What's going on here? And he goes, it gets better. You can actually make a career out of this doing radio as a DJ. I'm going to radio school. You've got a voice that's finally dropped, because I had a pretty high voice when I was at school. And he said, why don't you come down to Max Rowley's Media Academy, and which was down in Redfern in Sydney. Yes. So off I went. Yep. And remember, so a lot of people I know in the industry have family or was something they always wanted to do. I had no idea. So I went down to radio school that first night, and I fell in love. From the very moment I fell in love, and I went, wow, this is just fantastic. So brilliant. And then it was just relationships, like, anything in life, I believe anything in business and career in life is all about relationships. So I worked that out very, very quickly, that radio was a very small business. To get in, you've got to work hard. You've got to get to know people. So I introduced myself to a local radio station, Coast Rock. Yep. Coast Rock in Gosford, but Coast Rock was a fairly new one, and I liked the sound of that. I liked the music they were playing. So I walked in off the street one day and introduced myself, and the program director at the time was a man by the name of Duncan Campbell. And I didn't ask for a job. I said, look, I'm going to radio school. This is what I would love to do. Is it possible to come in and use the studios to practice? And maybe yourself or the other announcers can also critique me and tell me where I can improve. Yep. And he said, yeah, no worries. Now, interestingly enough, that man is now the boss of ARN and looks after, Coal Sandlands and all those. Yeah. He ended up being the boss of the Triple M network at a period and got my first break at Triple M in Brisbane. Yep. But to answer your question, it was partly radio school. And then I used to sit in that studio at Coast Rock FM. I wasn't working there. And I'd make my own shows. Yep. I'd record them onto cassette, air checks as we call them. And then I would send them out to every radio station around the country. And I never asked for a job. I asked for them to critique me and tell me how I could improve. Now, I would send out in any given week 40 cassettes, get no responses half the time. But then every now and then you get a bite. And I got a bite from a guy by the name of Brad Story, who was in Cairns, and he critiqued me. So I went back in the studio, tried to fix what he said, sent him another tape. We built a relationship. Eventually, I got a job with him. And
Was that up in Cairns?
that was in Cairns, yeah.
Yeah.
But I had in between time, I built relationships at Coast Rock, and a girl that worked at Coast Rock in sales went to Today FM in Sydney.
Yep.
Rang me up one day, and I was still doing the geotech work and then doing radio school and all the rest of it. And she said, would you be interested in a job driving the Black Thunders, so the promotional vehicles at Today? And I went, does that get me close to the studio? Does that get me to allow me to meet the other announcers there that are the best in the country? You know, Keith Williams was doing Drive, and I loved his sound. Mike Hammond was in there those days. So I got the job, and so then I would drive around giving out icy cold cans of Coke.
Coke, yes.
Yeah, we're on the streets. And I became what was called the Night Stalker, or Blade Runner.
Yep.
Was my name. And I ended up working with the Nighttime Show with Dave Reimer. And that was fantastic. That was just, you know, for a kid that came out of a fairly, it was a fairly quiet area on the Central Coast, to be thrown into, that was the number one radio station.
Yeah.
So to be amongst the best of the best, to see what they did, and to get their advice. And they were all giving. The industry, for the most part, is very giving, you know, that they would, you know, if you wanted them to critique you or give you any advice, you know. It was some hard times, though. It was pretty, you know, I'm sure that you can attest that, you know, I'm 49, so I think back in those days, bosses could be pretty harsh. There was none of the PC stuff going on.
Unless you were Doug Mulray on Triple M, and you could get away with it because you had the number one show.
Yeah, probably not so much that. I mean, just harsh. You know, there was no HR back then. So, you know, there'd be screaming matches. People would yell at you and scream at you, and they'd be yelling and screaming back. And
so who had the biggest influence on you up until then, out of all the presenters and people you worked with?
So I guess that's it's got a few levels. So I would think, and I was only thinking about this recently, thinking back at my career and I guess the steps and when things changed. And I think Duncan Campbell would be the man that I guess really gave me the breaks.
Yeah.
Initially. And then people within that business initially. So a guy called Daniel Gates, Dave Wilson, were probably the two first other announcers that that I was able to get an idea of how the business worked, get an idea of what you needed to do to be a good announcer, put together a show. Influences. I guess I listened to a lot of announcers, and then I would take out what I liked. Yeah. So I would like Keith Williams. Keith Williams, you could be in the Today FM studios and be down the other end, and all the doors are shut, and for all intensive purposes, they're soundproof. And you could hear Keith on the air. He was so loud, but he just had a great voice, a great style. Because that was a period where everything was changing. We're going from, I grew up listening to 2SM with Jono and Deno.
Yeah.
And if you go back further than that, it was all about, oh, you're listening to radio and you've got to pretend who you are and put on a different voice and be a different person.
Yes.
Once we got into the late 80s, 90s, and to now, it was more about just being you. It was, so it's, you know, I was explaining this to someone the other day. It's a very bizarre gig in the sense of you want to be natural, you want to be yourself, but they throw these other elements in that are so unnatural, you know, things that you have to say. You know, when I was at Triple M in Brisbane, one of our lines that we had to say at one stage was FM 104 Triple M Brisbane's best rock as we roll into another 40 minutes non-stop.
Don't say that without taking a breath, eh?
Yeah, funny how I can still say it because we, you know, so often that's what you did. So, yeah.
So how did you end up in Sydney's youngest station at the time in the southwest of Sydney? This little station owned by a family out of Wollongong, which was starting up. It had no audience. You've come in, it had a couple of stars, but you would have seen that. You've been working at Today FM, and you know, a few years down the track, all of a sudden this offer comes up to move out to a fledgling.
There was a lot of water between the bridge, and let's remember, Today FM, I wasn't an announcer at Today FM. I was on the air in promotions, and that was fantastic. By the time the gig at C91 came up, which, as you said, was the family business of Win Television, and for those that know, that listen to the radio, it was at the same time that Nova started. So, look, I'm going to rattle off some figures here that may not be exactly right, so don't hold me out to dry. But the Nova license, for instance, may have sold for $100 million. Yeah. The license for the one in Campbelltown was $10 million. The idea behind employing myself and the other guys at C91, so Rob Duckworth, Byron Webb, Stu Creaney, and myself, we all had a Triple M background. They knew that the Southwest had a rock feel to it, and a lot of people loved the M's. So, look, I was just approached. I was between gigs at the time.
Yep.
In fact, when I say between gigs, I was really between gigs. So radio is a funny thing. Many of us have lots of other jobs going on at the same time, because you never know when you get that tap on the shoulder and go, yeah, no, we don't want you anymore. Maybe, and your ratings might be poor, your ratings may be good, and you just don't get on with a new PD, whatever it is, you just got to be ready. So I've always done voiceover and TV work along the way, and MC gigs, as you spoke about. So I was in between. I'd left Triple M and started a business with a mate of mine, the aforementioned Byron Webb. He's on Smooth these days, Sydney and Melbourne. And we trained radio announcers for a period. And we did that and did quite well at that. And then we ended up wrapping that up, and I was sort of in between work. I won't go into details, but I've worked at a few different stations, and one thing led to another, and I ended up not in radio at that stage. Wanted to get back in. And I think it might have been, I don't know if it was Stu Creaney or whether it was Byron that tipped me into the job. They had a meeting with Dave Archer.
Yep, who's still there.
He's still there. And I think my name was put forward that, if you're looking for people. And we had a meeting, and away you went. And I started off in Drive.
So what was
C91. And
what was the biggest challenge? And I mean, anyone who's listening to this, who's starting a new business or starting anything brand new, and you've walked into a clean slate. If looking back now, what do you think was the biggest challenge you faced at that station?
Yes, that's an interesting question, because challenge is probably not the right word.
Yeah.
Because it was exciting.
Yeah.
The challenge was obvious, to find an audience.
Yeah.
From nowhere, from a standing start. But I think that was exciting to all of us, because none of us had been a part of that. Well, Stu had been part of that because he'd gone from Double J,
yes,
and over to Triple M when they were new. So he'd had a feeling of what that was like. But I certainly hadn't. It was exciting. It wasn't a challenge like, wow, we're gonna, this is really difficult, and it was just an exciting time, and the guys were fantastic. We all got on, the whole team. It was a group effort, a team effort. We all just got on very, very well. I mean, in the early days, there wasn't even a radio station. So we got employed, and we'd all sit down at the club hotel and have lunch and beers, working out what we're going to do. Working out, well, what are we going to play? What are we going to do in shows? Talking about, well, how are we going to win this market over? What do we need to do? And more importantly, what is it that the audience wants? Because we can sit there until the cows come home and say, this is what we want to do, but it's not about us. It's actually about the audience.
So it's really no different to anyone else opening a new business.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
And look, I wasn't a part of the business side of it. I'm sure there was a lot of other things going on behind the scenes, and probably a lot of sweaty palms with the amount of money that was being spent.
Yeah.
Hand over fist, it's not cheap to set up a new radio station. So, they would have, probably thrown in another 10 mil straight away just to set up the station. It could be more than that. But for us, it was a very, very exciting time. And for me personally, it was my chance, I guess, to build a show from the ground up and make it my own. So that was great. Yeah.
So after you've left there, if you look back at it now, what was the biggest lesson you learned from working at 91.3 and building something up to which is a station which is very successful today? like all radio stations, have got all new presenters. But what did you learn out of that? I mean, your life changed immensely when you left.
Look, I think for me, I grew as an announcer.
Yeah.
I was given a lot of freedom to develop. I was given a lot of freedom to be creative.
Yep.
So yeah, I grew, and look, and I grew as an individual as well, because as timing would have it, I'd just prior to getting that job, I met my now wife.
Yes.
We've been together ever since. So she met me out of radio, which is a funny story, because when I accepted the job, and we were living in Surrey Hills in Sydney at the time, so I commuted initially, and I would either catch the train, and let's be honest, when they put that the airport line through, it was really fast when they first put it through. It was fantastic. It was either that, or I used to drive down in my old 1962 EK Holden station wagon.
Yep.
But I remember saying to Deb when I got the job that, hey, when I get this job, I'm going to get all the talking out of the system. So I won't be interrupting you and talking so much at home when you're watching telly anymore. She tells a story that what happened was, I got back into radio, then I come home and talk about what I talked about. So it didn't improve a completely. So, yeah.
So what brought on the big change and the move to another state?
So it was probably, the move was more it wasn't a career move. It was a personal move. That came down to my father had been diagnosed with cancer.
Yep.
He's since passed. And it was just that bit of a kick along. Deb and I had spoken about moving up to the sunny state for some time. I'd lived here, when I was at the M's back in the 90s, and obviously further up in Cairns prior to that. Two of my really good friends were up here.
Yep.
But Deb's family was all in Sydney. Mine was scattered about, so it wasn't as big a move for me. She wanted to be close to her family. So we sort of held off and said that's something probably for later. Then when we had the diagnosis from my father, we went, here's a guy who's worked so hard all of his life. This is the time, and he was only young. He was only like 73 when he passed away.
That is young, yeah.
And his hour to just do what he wanted to do. So he moved to Foster Tuncurry, and was meant to be living, a nice life up there.
Yep.
And we just went, well, what are we waiting for? I think we give ourselves lots of reasons to not do what we really want to do or be wherever we want to be.
Yep.
I think it's that old thing, isn't it? There's a pain threshold, right?
Yep.
We've all heard of this before. Anyone that's been through any coaching.
Yes, pain and pleasure, yeah.
And it's, it's the same in sales as well. People won't make a change until the pain they're in now becomes lesser if they make that change.
That's true, yeah. Very true, mate.
So I think we were feeling that pain of, well, we're just missing out. We're just waiting. And look, to, I guess, Deb's credit, she decided, okay, look, I'm happy to move as long as I can still come down and keep in contact with my family a lot. And her sister does come up a bit and we go down there. Obviously, COVID has made that a little bit harder.
Yes.
But it was a lifestyle change. It's like, you know what? Let's just do it. So we had essentially, I'll tell a little kind of a secret here.
I won't tell anybody.
Okay. So we, the place we're in now is an apartment. So we'd be on acreage. So father-in-law thought we were crazy. It's like, Rob, you're going to be so bored. What are you thinking? And I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to have to clean my own pool anymore. I'm not going to have to spend all my weekend mowing my lawns and doing my edges. And living in the southwest of Sydney, it got so hot all the time that I just felt like I was constantly putting water on the lawn. And I used to joke with my neighbour next door. I go, what sort of life are we living? We spend all this time watering it so it grows so we can cut it. There's something going on here that's just not quite right. Anyway, so we bought off the plan. So we thought of doing management rights up here.
Yes.
A real estate license by then. And then I was going to get a Queensland one. So we came up here to look around. There weren't any that really suited us. So we went for a drive and drove through an area that Deb had fallen in love with, and said this would be a great place for the kids for school, because it was a great government school, but private assisted government school.
Mm.
Drove through and there was a display centre that had opened up 2 days earlier for a new apartment complex.
Meant to be.
We walked in and went, wow, that looks fantastic. And they're big apartments, you know, for a family to live in, a family of 4 and a dog. So we said no initially, and then we ended up missing out. They all sold.
Yep.
And we got a call in the car one day saying, hey, one's not available, do you want it? And Deb hung up and told me and said, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, we felt very disappointed, didn't we? We missed out, so let's buy it. So we bought it. We had no jobs to go to. We had nothing.
You backed yourself.
Just backed ourselves. And then it all fell into place. And not to get into too many details, I ended up in the job that they offered me a role as state sales manager on the Gold Coast.
On the Gold Coast. That's terrible.
And everyone said, how does that? Yeah, it's sheer luck. But, you know, I'm a big believer that, you know, if you jump, you'll land.
You will.
The hardest part is to jump. You've just got to jump.
I say to many people, I love jumping without a parachute, and they look at me funny. And they say, why? I said, because it's the most fun. Because you don't know where you're going to land.
Yeah, just be careful you say that too. It's not literal, everyone. It's not literal.
No. You got to go up on a plane first to do that. So we've spoken to now, you're back in radio up on the Gold Coast, but you actually have gone into probably the second hardest industry, the real estate industry. What were you thinking, Rob?
I've always had an interest in real estate.
Yep.
Bought my first house in my early 20s when I was a triple immigrant, and it was rough. It was the cheapest house sold in the area, and there was a good reason for it. But that's all I could afford. I sold my car.
Yep.
I used that money for the house. I bought a motorbike in between time, and all the money I saved up from extra gigs. Back in the days when you could, tax department's not listening, you go and do cash jobs, you know.
Never did any of them as a roadie, ever.
Down at the local nightclubs where you go and host the Miss Lovely Leagues competition or whatever, and they'd give you money, so you'd save up that way. So I'd always had an interest. My parents had always talked about, you know, property and how important it is to, you know, have that stable base and all the rest of it. So, and then through the years, and all the years that I was at C91, for instance, I used to have a real estate segment with one of the local real estate agents, Mr. Copeland.
He's still around.
Was combined now, I think, My Property, I believe.
Yes,
Property. Yeah.
That's true.
It's hard sometimes to keep up with the real estate agents because they can swap and change sometimes.
Yes.
So I had an interest that was there, and then I took a redundancy at C91 after 15 years. It's probably a good way to leave a business. Let's be honest. You never want to leave, but if you're going to leave, then let's do it that way. Thank you very much. So I was in my early 40s, and what do I do?
Yeah.
I mean, radio is my first love, and if I could do it until the day I died, I would. But not a lot of jobs. You've got a family, so how much do I want to chase and move around chasing it? Not so much. So how can I use my skills that I've acquired in all my years working in radio, along with the TV and MC? And I had various people asking me if I wanted to go into real estate and be an agent. And for whatever reason, that it just never really floated my boat. I think about it now, and I think 15, 20 years ago, I wish I had it with what I know about the industry now. But then someone floated the idea, I can't recall who it was, but someone floated the idea of being an auctioneer.
Yeah.
I'd never thought of it. It was kind of like the radio thing. It was thrown in my lap, something I'd never thought of. I wished I had known about it earlier because I would have added that string. I would have done radio, TV, MC, and auctions. I would have done them all, you know. I'm not afraid of hard work. It's all good.
No.
There are so many hours in the day that you've got to use all of them. So someone mentioned this to me, so then I looked into it. And I thought, hey, this sounds cool. Yeah. So at that point, I went, well, if I'm going to do it, I want to do it properly. Yeah. So I sought out who were the auction companies out there. Now, there's only 2 in Sydney at that stage that were the major players. So one that a lot of people knew because of the block was Cooley's.
Yes.
Damien Cooley. and then another was Auction Works, which probably a lot of people that are outside of the industry and are not associated may not know. So I sent off a request to each of them, talking about myself and saying, hey, this is what I want to do, blah, blah, blah. And David Scholes, who was running Auction Works at that stage with Jesse Davidson, and now Jesse has taken over the business. He got back to me and said, hey, come in, let's meet. And I just got a really good vibe, just a great vibe from Dave. Dave is, he's been an auctioneer for forever and a day, and a lot of the auctions out in the country as well, you know, so stock and all the rest of it. And, you know, when you meet people, you just get a good feeling. You just get this, yeah, I can work with you.
Yep.
So they pretty much there and then said, okay, let's work on making this happen. In the meantime, I did hear back from Coolies as well, and had a meeting with Paul and Damien, and they were really good guys as well. But I'd kind of already made up my decision by then, so I followed that through with Auction Works. And then, so I guess where it's interesting. So I've been an auctioneer now for going on 6 years, 5, 6 years.
Yes.
Doesn't sound like a long time, but in saying that, I had so many skills already. So then I just needed to adjust and realign to how to use those skills, performing, obviously.
Yep.
Getting it up in front of people was not a problem. So then it was legislation, auction call, becoming an auctioneer. So because I wasn't an agent at the same time, and I had no job, I had all this time in the world, Deb had said to me, you've worked hard, just take time to work out what you want to do, which is what we do.
Yeah.
So I would go into the city, into Sydney, and go into the auction rooms in there and get one-on-one training with Dave and Jesse. And I was training, I reckon I would have been doing a minimum of 6 hours a day, 5 to 7 days a week of training as an auctioneer. Just that.
Now, I'm going to interrupt you there. I've been listening intently to this, everything you've been saying today. And this is mainly for the people who are listening. One thing's come through is you've got a very strong work ethic. And every time you chose to do something, you put in 100% and made sure that you did it better and better each time. Is that something your parents instilled in you? Or is that something you learnt along the way?
Look, definitely my father, growing up and looking how my father worked, and then my mother later on. An example is, they moved us up to the Central Coast out of Mount Druitt, which I obviously thank them for. A lot of great people have come out of that area, but there's no doubt I grew up in a really beautiful place, so I'm very lucky at that. But they took a big chance. They bought in a place where they knew no one, in the middle of nowhere. The house was, I think, initially a 2-bedroom house on stilts. When our kids complain about, i.e. living in an apartment and they don't have a second living room, first world problems, kids. Our toilet was outside, downstairs. We had to go out the front door, along the veranda, down the stairs, underneath, and that's where the loo was. And that was like that for at least half of my childhood until later on when Mum and Dad built underneath. But we moved up there, and when you talk about work ethic, my dad kept his job. He was working at Les Vags in Pennant Hills. It's now
a Holden dealer, wasn't it?
Holden dealer, yeah, it still is. And, well, not now. There's no Holden, is there?
No.
So Dad was a detailer, spray painter.
Yep.
And he also took on cleaning the premises before he did those jobs. So he would get up when it was dark, and he'd hop on the old Red Rattler from Woy Woy train station. If you're not from the area, you heard that right. Woy Woy, I haven't got to stutter. It's like Wagga Wagga.
Yep.
Liked it so much they called him twice.
Yes.
So he would get on in the dark. Mum would drive him to the station because we could only afford one car, obviously, which is what most people did back then. That wasn't unusual. So Mum would drive him to the station at Sparrow Park, if I can say that. And he wouldn't get home until dark. And he'd do multiple jobs. And then both my parents, as time went on, would work on. Dad eventually got a job on the Central Coast working at Kincumber Hotel, which I think was owned by Willesee and Williamson, so Terry Willesee. Relation, obviously. Not a relation of me, I mean of the Willesee. And then on the weekends, Mum and Dad would clean the place. So they'd go up there and they'd clean after they had all the bikies and the rock bands and that the night before. So I grew up watching my dad just work very, very hard at work, and then come home and on the weekends would work at landscaping the yard. You know, we had a quarter acre, and he did it all himself. You know, building retaining walls, building a bridge over it, very 70s, very cool.
Yeah.
So and then my mum on the back of that, you know, and then my dad ended up breaking his back, went into traction. So then my mum had to step up, and then she worked. And I noticed that every time, and it wasn't necessarily easy. You know, they would fight. There were hard times, but I noticed that they would just roll up their sleeves and just do what they had to do for the family. And that's the ethic I take with me now. It really is. You know, you don't get, you know, we can get lucky. Let's be honest. Some people get lucky. Some people are born into luck.
Yes.
But keeping that, it's improving on it and doing something with it. And that only comes from hard work. You know, and I'm no saint. You know, if I could do my time again, there's lots of areas where I think I probably could have done more.
Yeah.
Probably to a fault, I guess, sometimes, you know. So, yeah.
If you fast forward to today, this is something that I've noticed. There are a lot of people out there in their chosen industry, say yours, real estate, radio, maybe sales or doing sales training, that think because they've been in an industry for 20 years, they know everything. They don't need to do the hard work. How do you, when you see someone like that, you want to tap into their thing, into their knowledge, into their ability. But quite often, some of the people coming through that have only been in the industry that they're in half the time are better than them. How important is it to keep yourself up to date, to change, to adapt, no matter what you're working in?
Look, I think in both the industries I've been in, young people coming through, and that's not necessarily young by age, it might be young to the business, are always a threat. You know, I mean, radio, there was always someone behind you that wanted your job. And let's be honest, there aren't many jobs. When you think about it, I remember when I decided to get into radio, someone said, really? Like, you're going to get a job in radio? Like, you know, there's like 5 jobs. That's it, you know. So I knew at that point that, you know, to get in, you had to work hard. Now, let me be honest, I didn't get my jobs in radio because I was necessarily the best announcer all the time, especially my earlier jobs. I was terrible. I was awful. I was nervous. I public speaking, I couldn't get up in front of class at school and talk. I used to sweat. My ears would go red. One of them's now red now.
Yeah.
I would have anxiety about it. You know, what I did like about radio was I sat in the studio and there was no one there, right? I'm just talking on my microphone. But what I did realize from my father, and that is being keen, showing you're keen and willing to learn gets you a lot further than just having talent. So in radio, there was people tapping on your shoulder, and I see it in real estate now, and you've obviously been in real estate, so you would understand that there's a thing they talk about, you know, attitude and energy, and I think we can become complacent, we can become relaxed, and sometimes that's not a bad thing to be relaxed once you've been in your career for a period. And if you don't want to be, you know, grinding the midnight hour and you want to enjoy your life a little bit, and that's all right. But what we can lose sometimes is that energy. And that is, you see a young agent in real estate come in and they're just chomping at the bit. Just give me as much as you can. I want to learn. I want to devour. You know, give me all your old, you know, your expired listings. Just give me everything. I want to get out there. You know, these are ones obviously that are go-getters. You know, it's not everyone. So, and they get results, and they don't get results because they're a really good agent. They get results because they put energy into it. So, you know, look, it's an interesting one when you see people come through, and I've seen it, especially in radio, and I guess because I spent a longer period there, seeing people come in and they can puff their chest out and say they're going to be really good and all the rest of it. I never held that against anyone though, because you know what, I was probably like that. I said I didn't have an ego when I started out, but I was a young upstart, you know.
We all were.
You know, so I don't hold that against people, but that as long as they're going to work for it. If you think you're just going to walk in and it's just all going to happen, it's not very often it does. Not sure if I answered your question.
No, you did. Actually, you answered it quite well. it's something that a lot of people don't realise. We see they talk about millennials, they talk about people who just expect because they expect, demand, respect because they've been in the industry for so long, and they've actually lost their energy and treat people coming up behind them, quite badly, when all the person coming up behind them wants to learn. And sometimes a young dog can teach an older dog new tricks. I mean, we're all here to learn, we're all here to change. Is there anything else? If you were sitting on the beach having a look and the young 20-year-old Rob Dory walked past, probably looking at the lovely ladies up the road, and it came to work, is there anything else you'd tell a 20-year-old Rob Dory that you haven't already learnt so far?
There's a long list, and yeah. I will be honest that I've suffered anxiety through my latter years, and have learnt from going to see professionals.
Yes,
that that comes from a wanting to strive to be the best at what I do.
Yes,
and there's a caveat in that, isn't there? That you're never going to be happy. You're always going to want to do better. So when you ask me that question, what would you say? I'm quite careful in answering that because we can all look back in hindsight.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm trying to work really hard just to be happy with what I have achieved.
Yep.
But there are probably there are definitely some elements in there that I think I thought I was taking as much advice all the time, but there were certain periods when I wanted to probably rush it.
Yes.
So there were certain periods where I would go, slow down, just be happy with where you are, listen to what the people are telling you around you before you go and jump in to that next thing. Yeah.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more. What you've just said, I think we've all been guilty of that, and guilty is not in a bad way. It is all part of a learning curve, and it's only if you don't learn from it, well, you've wasted your time. If you're up at Grumpy's Wharf there on the Gold Coast, and you're sitting there, and you've got a big table, 4 or 5 empty spots, you've had a very good career, and you've got a long career still ahead of you. And I walked up and said, Rob, we've got room for 4 people. Alive or dead, who would you invite for lunch and why?
Now, let's be honest, Rob's already asked me this. And I always thought that I'd be able to answer this very quickly. When you did ask me, though, you didn't say dead. So I thought it was only alive. So I haven't got any dead people that should be really easy. But there's so many people.
Yeah.
And let me just, I haven't answered your question yet. I know that I'm trying to go around it, right?
You're padding, as they say in radio terms.
And it's partly because I really, look, I enjoy interviewing people as well. So I think of all the great people and the great stories you could hear. So I guess some of the people that came to mind are probably some that I've had for some time. So Richard Branson, I think would be amazing to sit down and talk to. Bruce Springsteen.
Yep.
You can probably see that's Bruce's very first album, signed by himself and the whole band behind me. So,
oh wow!
So, Bruce Springsteen, and then from there it was kind of hard. Like Larry David, creator of Seinfeld, and he now has his own show as well. I think he'd be fun to catch up with and sit down with. Jack Nicholson.
Yes,
he'd be fantastic. I could go on and on. I thought Belinda Gates, I think, would be good after watching a documentary around Belinda and Bill. I think that she would be fantastic, and maybe Bill can tag along. Maybe he's got something on. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And this one's a bit of a left of field. I've always been anyone that knows me knows that I'm quite happy to talk about it, probably embarrassingly for my kids, but I'm a big fan of Back to the Future.
Yes.
So maybe Michael J. Fox, but probably not because of that, but because of what he's gone through with his ailments.
What a champion!
How he's dealt with that. I mean, he used to be a pretty amazing guy. So, and maybe he does know how to create the flux capacitor that makes time travel possible. And then I could go back to that 20-year-old Rob.
Yes, you could. So I'm going to ask you one more question before we wrap up today.
Sure.
Out of all the people you've interviewed on radio, who has been the most enjoyable to interview?
Wow.
It's easy to pick the person who you could say was not a nice person and was very difficult. And we've all done interviews. You and I both done interviews where people answer you with 1, 2 word questions and answers, and there's no flow. But there must have been someone that you're sitting in a studio or wherever it was doing your interview that was just a pure joy to sit down and talk to.
Yeah, look, there's probably
quite, or even a couple.
But I'd probably say this: the most I used to do a thing at C91 where we used to get live artists or bands in.
Yeah.
So I think one of the most enjoyable times I had with having people in the studio was having like the Choir Boys in. They were just fun every time I got them in. It was just an easy interview. I switched to Breakfast, which is not easy for a rock and roll band to come in and perform live. So they rocked up in their pajamas. So, I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but that's probably, I love that. And then I had just other little instances that were enjoyable, like Adam Levine from Maroon 5, interviewing him just on the phone, wasn't in person. Their first hit, Harder to Breathe, was out. They were touring through the United States. They weren't big names at this stage. But I remember for some reason something happened and I was put on the phone with his girlfriend at the time.
Yeah. And
we chatted longer, the two of us, than him, and he kind of got the shits.
Yeah, but we know that, you...
I always thought that was... It was just when... I guess more of what I'm saying there is I think... It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter whether it's a big name star. When you connect with someone, that there's no guard up anymore. I think that's good. I remember Ivor Davies. I interviewed, one of my very, very early interviews, Ivor Davies, and I was in Cairns, and someone had said to me, "He can be quite difficult to interview." How much truth's around that, I don't know. But someone said to me, "So, the best thing you can do when you interview someone," and we used to have the old reel-to-reel tape, is have the tape rolling before you even call them or get them in the studio. And from the moment they're in, that's the interview. So I remember chatting to him, and then at the end of it said, "Oh, that's fantastic. We'll look forward to seeing you whenever you tour. Can I get you to do some IDs, where they say their name and And he goes, "Yeah, sure. When do you want to do the interview?" And I said, "We're done. Is there anything in the interview that you don't want to go to air?" And he goes, "Don't think so." And that was a great lesson. That it wasn't hey, I've got a stock standard list of questions.
Yeah.
Well, he had some things, but it was listening to the person you're interviewing like a normal conversation. And that's when you get the best out of people. That's when you get them to relax and you learn things that you wouldn't otherwise learn. Because let's be honest, if you watch TV or listen to radio all the time, people are on they're promoting a movie, for instance, and everyone's interviewing them and they're all asking the same questions. Half the time it's kind of like, maybe you should just, get one person to go and do the interview and give everyone else the audio, because there's not, so you'll hear some people trying to be creative, and I think that's really cool.
I've heard that does happen sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that you're just actually giving everyone a good lesson. It doesn't matter if you're in radio, if you're in sales, if you're working at Woolies. The ability to listen to somebody and actually hear what they're saying, not to reply, is an art, and it's a skill. And the people I've met that have been the most successful have that ability to actually hear what someone's telling them. So I think that's absolutely awesome.
I say to my son.
Does he pay any attention?
We're given 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Oh, mate, how true. Look, Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure. You and I have been mates for a long time, but we've talked about stuff today that neither of us knew about.
This is different. You interviewing me, I never expected this to happen. And I can honestly say I was a bit nervous. I don't want to be interviewed. I want to do the interviewing. I'm in control then. There's no control.
Mate, there is no control, because everything we're saying here is going to air. So you're going to have a lot of fun with it. It's been a pleasure, mate. You are awesome. You're very good on radio. If anyone is up on the Gold Coast and you can hear about Rob Dory in the morning, tune in, because he does have a good show. And if you're looking to someone to auction up there.
Listen anywhere, mate. 100.6 Breeze FM. Download it to your iHeartRadio app and you can listen to me anywhere. There you go.
And if you want to get a great result for your auction, make sure your real estate agent up on the Gold Coast tracks down Dory. Mate, Say hello to Deb for us. Enjoy the Gold Coast, and we'll be back with you soon.
Cheers, mate.